Welcome, everybody, to another Fireside Chat with the Xperts. Here again with Dr. Bill Cardoso. We have a special guest with us today, Mike Konrad with Aqueous Technologies. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. We're big fans of your podcast, so I'm very happy to have you on with us.
Well, thanks.
So maybe you can give a quick introduction of yourself, your technology, and your company, what you guys do.
Sure. Well, again, Mike Konrad. I founded a company called Aqueous Technologies in 1992. We build cleaning equipment for the electronic industry, basically post-reflow cleaning of circuit boards, flux removal, other contaminant species removal, stencil cleaning, ionic contamination testing, anything to do with that. We're a pretty narrow focus. We're not a very broad company. We offer cleaning and cleanliness testing. That's pretty much our core competency. I started in this cleaning industry in 1985, and that's very sweet, Bill. That was kissing your kids to go off to school.
Yeah, she went to the dentist. So
that's sweet.
Yes,
that's sweet. You make me miss my grandchildren. So I started in this industry in 1985 and worked for a company, developed their cleaning line. They were a soldering equipment company. And I worked to develop a line of cleaners because the rumor was that cleaning was going to become more required. Turned out to be the opposite. That's so much for my prediction skills. But there was a treaty in 1989 called the Montreal Protocol. And that treaty would ban the solvents that were going to be used, 1,1,1-trichloroethane, Freon TMS, that were being used to clean circuit boards. And it would be a 10-year phase out because of the CFC issue and ozone depletion and all of that. It's a big environmental treaty. And my thought was, we need to get into the water-based cleaning, the aqueous-based cleaning side, because the solvents are all going away, which was true. However, necessity being the mother of invention, no clean flux was introduced. So instead of everyone switching over to aqueous, to water-based, a lot of the industry switched over to not cleaning at all. And so our business back in those days was mainly to military and medical and space and high rel manufacturers, because they clean regardless. They don't buy into the no clean concept. So as soon as we started the business, 3/4 of our potential customer base kind of went away. But over the course of the last 30 years or so, cleaning has kind of come back into vogue because of things like miniaturization. Boards are getting very small. The space between conductors is microscopically small. And it turns out that the smaller the gap between a cathode and an anode, between the conductors of a board, the less tolerance for residue between those places. If you want to put things close together, that gap has to be cleaner than if you have them farther apart. So the cleaning has come back into vogue again, and we're rocking. And I'm sure every other cleaning equipment company and cleaning chemical company is rocking right now too, because of all of the things that I'd mentioned. And then IoT is a big friend of ours because Internet of Things, we're putting electronics into things that we've never had them in before, and then dragging them outside with us. And harsh environments are really good for the cleaning business too, because the harsher the environment, the more it reacts with any residues that are left on the board. So anyway, a very long answer to your short question. That's what we do at Aqueous.
That's what we specialize in here.
Long answers to short questions.
The whole half an hour on one question. Yeah.
Bill and I work together on the SMTA board, so I think we are aware of each other's propensity to
exactly
keep talking. This is a 3-hour show, right?
It's a 3-hour show. Well, this is
right.
part one of
Right.
I think we're starting a series here.
There you go.
Let's pitch Netflix. Maybe they'll pick it up.
It might as well.
But I like my talk, and yours is actually interesting. I'm very, I'm fascinated by entrepreneurial stories, right? And you have a very interesting story of how that spark happened, right? To start Aqueous, because it's a special feeling, right? To start something from nothing, basically, right? From a spark in your mind, and and then developed to what's today the clean equipment company in the world, right? Which is Aqueous. Share with us that the feeling, right, of when you said, this is BS. I'm gonna start my own company, turn my own path, to where you're now, right, sitting and being the key player in this market.
Well, yeah, I've had a lot of time to reflect on that, and I enjoy speaking to college students on the same subject. I think you have done that too.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was invited to Dartmouth College last year to talk to their graduating engineers, and I love talking to them because they accept everything. They're everything's possible, right? They don't get jaded over the years like we do. But back in 1985, I said I was working for that soldering equipment company. I developed their line of cleaners for them, and I had a conversation with them. I said, we really need to get into cleaning. And they went, nah, no, we don't need to be in cleaning. We're a soldering equipment company. And I'm pounding the drums and I'm having this little tantrum. I'm like, we really need to get into cleaning. And they said, no, they're not interested. So finally I made a deal with them. I said, okay, I feel so strongly about it. I'll develop the equipment on my time. And I'm kind of clever. I'm not all that clever, but I'm clever enough to get it started. And I know some clever people and we can collaborate. So long story short, I put a machine together. We brought it to them, and we agreed that we would set up this side company and build the equipment at night, sell it by day.
Wow.
So it was my equipment, kind of licensed to my employer, and that was a great idea. Except I was not as good at building equipment as I was designing it and selling it. So it became pretty apparent with long lead times that I'm not in the manufacturing business. So I sold the equipment. I sold all the rights to it to my employer for basically my cost.
Mm-hmm.
Can't say I was a great business person back then, but I sold it for my cost. And I was just happy because I thought naively that now my employer is going to be more successful. So I'll be more successful.
Yeah.
And then, and it was a big success. We were selling tons of these machines. And I had this, I was in my 30s and I had this, naive perception that I'm a badass now. I saved the company, and it was me. And I thought that the next time we had a product development meeting, that I would, be carried in on a chariot and fed grapes and fanned with, all that hail Mike thing.
So I had an idea.
Exactly. So they said, Mike, what do you think we should build over the next few years? And I came up with another cleaner idea. This one was going to be closed loop, no drain. And they went, and then someone else came up with a dorky idea, and they went with the dorky idea in my mind. They went with the dorky idea, and I was pissed off. I was just absolutely furious and offended, and and then I started thinking, well, wait a minute. If this is such a good idea, why do I want someone else to pay for it? If this is such a good idea, I should do it. And I had a talk with my wife, and a look through our bank account, which wasn't good. And I thought, okay, well, if it's really a good idea, if I really believe it, I'll find a way to do it. So I wrote a business plan and took it to a bank, and naively thought that because I have a business plan, they would listen to me, and they were kind enough to listen to me and then send me a rejection letter, as did the next bank and the next bank and the next bank.
You're kidding me? They didn't just give you a stash of money after you showed them your
I brought an empty
business
briefcase expecting to fill it up, right? But I left empty-handed. So
that's insane.
At some point, I raised the money, credit cards and family and lots of promises, and gave my notice and said, okay, I'm ready to do it myself. And 2 months later, after I signed a lease on a building and we were developing the first machine, I got sued by my former employer.
Of course.
And it turns out they didn't like the idea that I was going to leave and compete. So they sued me. And we went to trial, and we won on everything. And even were awarded some of our attorney's fees back, which we never got. But anyway, and that was the beginning. And then now I look back and I'm like, what are the skills that an entrepreneur has? What are the attributes of an entrepreneur? And one of the attributes is a very terrible sense of risk.
Yeah.
Everyone would look, 100 people will look at this and go, nope, not going to do it. And an entrepreneur will look at it and go, well, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance it could work. Let's do it, right?
A 1 in 1,000 is not zero, right?
It's 1 in 1,000. There's one there, right? Someone's got to win, right? It's like the lottery. Somebody wins. So I think we have a terrible sense of risk, but those skills that are absolutely required to start a company, absolutely required, a lousy assessment of risk and kind of a tunnel vision and passion and all those things. Without those, you can't really start a company, and you know that, Bill, because you've done the same thing. You're on the same path.
Yeah.
But those same skills, though, if you don't modify those skills, will kill your company.
Exactly.
Because you can only sit at at the poker table in Vegas for so many hands before statistically you're going to lose. Kind of like Kenny Rogers. You got to know when to fold. You got to know, and I think those skills help you, but they will kill you. And to me, you're a motorhead, Bill. So, every once in a while, if I don't run my old 68 Mustang for a while, I have to throw a little starter fluid, down the carburetor and then run and turn it on real quick and start it. I think the skills that entrepreneurs have are like starter fluid. You can start a car on starter fluid, but if you run it on starter fluid, you burn the valves, everything will just kind of blow up. So I think that's the path I ended up ultimately on, is realizing that my startup skills are not my sustainability skills. And they're good for start and growth, but they're not good. They're good to get you off the line, but they're not good to sustain you. So it's been a journey of learning new skills, learning how to manage risk, learning, it's all risk, no guts, no glory when you start a company. But if you keep that up, you're going to lose that company, which is why so many companies fail.
Exactly. It's a good point. It's not, some people say that entrepreneurs are risk averse. And I never liked that concept, or not risk averse, but they like risk, right? They're not risk averse. And I don't think it's lack of it's not the fact that we're not risk averse. We just ignore it, right? You look at the risk and you say, you know what? We'll figure a way out. And I think you've done a phenomenal job growing Aqueous by understanding your visionary position in the company, right? The guy who sees the beyond the horizon. And and with that, you have an amazing operator, John Hall, who's been doing a phenomenal job. And then I really love how you've been growing that educational component, right, for Aqueous. And much like we do, we don't sell by saying how amazing our wares are, but you educate people. And like you said before, you hope that an educated person makes an educated decision, and hopefully it's going to be our product. But you have an amazing podcast, Reliability Matters. I just saw over 11,000 downloads. I had no idea you had such a big family. So congratulations.
I didn't either. It's a little scary. When I started,
what's about Reliability Matters? What's that about? And how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, I started a couple of years ago. I enjoy playing with new platforms, usually before they're quite ready for prime time. Like we started doing webinars more than 10 years ago, back when it was all GoToMeeting and
WebEx.
They were terrible. Some still are, but they're terrible. You would drop off halfway through. You couldn't tell how many people were watching in the early days. You were talking into the blind, basically. Had no idea if there was anyone on the other side. Which is a whole skill set that, you're aware of that when you're looking into a camera and you're not looking into someone's face, you have no visual cues and things like that. So it's a whole different skill set to learn. But
to be fair, Mike, even when I do live talks, I don't have anyone to talk to. So I've been used to that for a long time.
Right. Exactly. Well, we all talk to ourselves at some point. Right. But the idea of the podcast came to me because I started listening to podcasts. I'm like, I love this technology because you can listen to it in the car. You can listen to it on a treadmill. Not that I'm ever on a treadmill. And you can start and stop. It's very convenient. So I thought, well, I'll try it. And I went on YouTube and took some lessons, some 12-year-olds on YouTube taught me how to do certain technical things and bought a microphone and a few little things and called up an old friend of mine Bob Willis, who's pretty well known consultant in our industry. And I said, okay, I'll start with him because he's better known than I am, and I'll interview him. And he was kind enough to say, okay. I had absolutely zero audience because I'd never recorded a show before, and I recorded about an hour-long show with him, and then spent days editing it to make it sound perfect, and launched it. And we had one or two subscribers and a couple downloads, and then came up with the next one. And I thought that we were going to do it every 2 weeks. I made a commitment to do it on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month. That forced me to keep it going.
Yeah.
And I went through my, digital Rolodex of contacts. I've been in the industry a long time, as you have. And I thought, well, I'll burn through my list of friends until they're on to me. And once I run out of my kind of organic friends, then I'll call it a day. I'll move on to whatever is next. And that was about 70 episodes ago. So
wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so it keeps going. And now, like you said, we just passed our 11th download, which just completely astonishes me. And I, it's not me. I'm a good host, not because I'm a good host. I'm a good host because I'm rather ignorant on certain subjects, and because I'm talking to subject matter experts like you. You were a guest on my show.
Yes, sir.
I don't know much about X-ray, right? So, but you do. But I'm really curious about certain things. I love to find out how things work. I'm a very curious person. Always have been. When I was a kid, I used to get into trouble because I would take my parents' appliances apart, the clock radio and whatever, the blender, and I would try and figure out how it worked. The reason I got in trouble is I didn't really have a desire to put it back together, at least completely. So
yeah,
my parents would always get mad because there'd be these things all in various states of
and all those appliances, right, Mike? They always have more pieces than they actually need to work, right? So when you put it back together, you're left over with like 5 screws and pieces that.
One of my favorite things, and this is where I really got into trouble. I would take a transistor radio, little 9-volt battery, and then I would take a pair of snippers and snip off a component. And to my shock, it still worked. I'm like, well, that was a wasted component. Why did they put that in there? And then I keep snipping wires or leads until it stopped working. And I could snip 5 or things off it and they would still work. Now, who knows? Maybe noise filters, antenna gains, whatever they were for. They had a purpose, I'm sure. But to me, I'm like, this is a waste of time. I could build a radio with half the components because
that's awesome.
Hence, I got in trouble. But anyway, that curious mindset allows me to really learn about other subjects. So I talk, about reflow with reflow experts, and DFM with failure analysis experts, and X-ray with X-ray experts like yourself, and profiling, and whatever topic we're on that has anything to do with reliability of circuit assemblies. I get to ask questions, and it's a lot better than snipping off components, right? I can just ask questions in a non-destructive way.
Yeah. So Mike, I just got a notice here from our producer. We don't have one, but anyway, they said that 10,000 for those downloads were from the X-ray episode. Just so you know.
I'll bet they were. I'll bet they were. I could look, but I let me look. Oh yes, you're right. Yes,
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Now,
we should just have we should just have you on the show for every episode, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that would be a good way to stay at 11,000 episodes for a while. Downloads. Now, so you are a forward-looking guy, right? You try these platforms before they become commonplace, right? You're doing podcasts before people knew, industry, right? They knew what podcasts were.
Within the industry, anyway. Yeah, I like
the industry. Yeah,
I like to do things that other people aren't doing.
We, with COVID and the shutdowns and this 13-month-long march that we've had, there's been a lot of digital presence and a lot of stuff out there. So what's next, right? What's the next way to interact with people, to connect, to have those conversations? What are you doing now that nobody else is?
Well, in the big world, we're not doing anything that no one else is, because, podcasts and virtual meetings and virtual events are all pretty common now. Within our industry, we're still a little bit unique. It's ironic. I'm sure this irony has landed on you too, that for an industry that basically creates the future, much of our industry is still in the past, in terms of how we function, right? We function archaically to produce things that are very futuristic and high tech, but we do it sometimes in a low tech way in terms of how we communicate. And that, well, I think is part of the aging of our industry. A lot of people in our industry are, they call it the silver tsunami. They'll soon be leaving the industry. They'll soon be retiring out. And for the longest time, there wasn't a lot of young blood like David and you, coming into the industry. It was all old guys and gals. And now we're seeing a lot of young blood coming into the industry. And I think that will change the way we communicate as well. I think the tech side of that will catch up. Clearly you guys are doing this. So, and other companies are starting to do it. I don't know what's going to be next. I do know that I do believe that because of the pandemic, it normalized virtual communication much more for the masses. Those of us that have been doing it for years really didn't have a change. In fact, we had an advantage because we were ready to go. Yeah. We didn't have a learning curve. But I think now that we can communicate pretty effectively with customers, we can do virtual demonstrations rather than live demonstrations, and they're not too far off, the value. I think once the pandemic is over, many people will still be working from home, and many people will still be doing virtual meetings, because I think companies have started to enjoy the savings and the higher profits associated with not putting people on airplanes for stupid reasons, and not flying in to look at something when you can look at it on a screen with, high def cameras and, good sound and good lighting. It's not 100% of the experience. It's maybe 60% of the experience, but it's 0% of the cost.
Oh, and then you get to have dinner with your family afterwards, right? So that has some value, right?
Right. And one of the side effects of the shutdown has been my grandkids, I have 2 grandkids. They go to school. They always get sick at certain times of year, and then they share it with their grandparents, with my wife and I, and then we all go through this. The germy little kids get everybody sick. Yeah. Nobody's been sick for a year because they're not. For the longest time they weren't in school. They're in school now, but no one's been sick for a year. And me traveling on airplanes, I'm a road warrior, right? I travel all the time, and I don't get sick very often, but when I do, it's always after a flight, and, now I don't have to sit in a germ-filled aluminum tube and get sick. I can just look at a teleprompter or look at a monitor, and here we are.
How old are your grandkids?
6 and 9.
Oh, great ages. That's awesome. That's the best time. So what would you tell them, right? Going back to my Konrad, 22-year-old my Konrad, what would you tell yourself, what would you tell grandkids to invest, to start a business, to do right now, knowing what you know?
Well, I think if I gave a young me advice of what I know now, I wouldn't have started a business. Not because I regret it at all, but the advice I would give would be counterproductive to starting the business. There almost needs to be this level of naivety, right? Naivety is a skill in terms of starting a business, because if you're aware of the risks, and let's face it, the Small Business Administration says that 75% of all new businesses fail in 10 years. 75%.
It's a lot.
Now, if you go to Vegas and play roulette, it's very close to 50-50. It's like 51-49. It's actually a little better than that. So even in Vegas, the worst odds are 50-50. Right? And if you go into business, there's a 75% statistical chance that you're not going to make it. Yeah. And look at what we do in business. We invest personally, or we are responsible personally for, maybe $1 million or $2, between inventory and accounts payable and tax liabilities and guarantees that we've made on the lease for the building. I mean, at any given time, any small business, you might be on the hook for $1 million. And if you net 10 grand at the end of the year, net, pay taxes on 10 grand, you think that's a success. Now, imagine if you went to Las Vegas and you sat at a table and you put $1 million bet down for the chance to win 10 grand, but there's a 75% chance you're going to lose. You would never do it, ever sit at that table. It's terrible. The return is too low. So I think if we told that, if 60-year-old Mike Konrad told 22-year-old Mike Konrad, these are the odds, particularly in your first few years, 22-year-old wouldn't do it. So there's an advantage in not knowing what you don't know. And this, like I said earlier, the skills that are required, I wouldn't call them really skills, they're more like attributes. So the attributes that are required to start a business is this tenacity, is this ignoring of the risk. It's just the passion. It's everything, that the blood, sweat, and tears that get a business going and keep it going. Mm-hmm. And hopefully you're smart enough. This is the advice I would give. Realize that once you start a business and you get your first little taste of success, that's when you need to start changing, because those skills that got you there are gonna be your demise, lead to your demise if you don't change. So what I thought was, we've all gone through the stage. I don't know about you, Bill, but I went through a stage where I was starting to get a little bit of success, and I'm like, oh man, I'm the smartest man on the planet. I did it. We're there. I can start cruising now. I can take my foot off the pedal. I don't have to look in the rearview mirror anymore. And, that's when you realize that business is like a video game. You just passed level 1. Now you're in level 2. And level 2 has more monsters, more trapdoors. You start losing lives, this whole thing, Jumanji kind of thing, right? Everything gets harder.
Yeah, but the rules keep changing as well, right? The rules are not always the same.
Oh, they change every level. There's new rules, and there's new ways to get you, right? So, and that's when you realize, I think, that business is not about starting. It's hard, but it's really about sustaining. And the other thing I would teach my younger self, maybe not at 22, but maybe I'd hold this advice in a time capsule and tell them to open it in 10 years, is the concept of growth. I was led to believe that you need to grow to survive. Mm-hmm. Grow, more sales, more sales, more sales. Well, if you push your people for more sales, they're going to get more sales, but they're not going to be profitable sales. They're just going to bring in sales to keep you happy.
Exactly.
And I think, at some point we realized that growth is not always good. Choosing your customer, buying your customer, having your customer choose you, buy you, is really the way to do it. And sometimes the most profitable word in sales is no.
No, exactly.
No, we're not going to take that order.
Yeah.
And so I think there has to be a really good partnership between the customer and the supplier. It's not just a conquest thing. In the early days, it's a conquest thing. Yeah, we got that order. Yeah, now let's get the other one. And sometimes the most savvy thing that we can do is let that customer go to your competitor.
Yeah,
because it's like a Trojan horse. They'll destroy them instead of destroying you if it's the wrong customer, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think you have to learn that in the right timing. I think there's a sequence for learning those things. And if you have all that knowledge too soon, you'll never start. So I liken it to the shifting of a manual transmission. You can't start in 5th gear.
No.
You start in 1st, but you can't go fast in 1st. Right. So you start in 1st, which is just really high torque, high leverage, and then you shift into 2nd, and then you shift into 3rd. And a lot of businesses fail. 75% of all businesses fail in 10 years because they never get out of 1st or 2nd gear.
Yeah.
Or they try and start in 5th gear, and they need that high torque, 1st gear. So
or they forget the clutch, right?
I'm trying to use as many automotive analogies as I can because I know you're very into cars. So.
No, yeah. Or you forget the clutch, right? And you go from 1st to 2nd in a very truncated, and sometimes you kill the car, right? So
Yeah,
I love that
exactly.
analogy.
So
Works really well.
it's a sequence to start a business. It's a sequence, and every sequence works at the right time. It doesn't work in another time.
Exactly.
So I think that's what I've learned.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. So
Speaking of,
Speaking of, exactly. I think we're over one question, David. I think we did great today.
Yeah, I think we got like 2 or 3 in there. So.
Mike, thanks so much, man. This is awesome. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks. I've watched your Fireside Chat, and of course, I am prepared to
look at that.
Have a fire next to me. I was going to have this on the whole time, but I just thought it was a moderately creepy. It's like an old man in a dark house,
fire hazard,
in the middle of a seance or something. So I'm glad I didn't stay with it.
And for you guys listening, check Reliability Matters. Really, really cool podcast from Mike. A lot of good stuff there. Download it and put in your iTunes and whatever you listen to your podcast, right?
Yeah.
To get the new stuff.
And look up the Bill Cardoso episode. That'll really push us over to the next 11,000. So.
If you want to fall asleep, or it's good for do a sleepless night. Thanks so much, Mike.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Thank you, everybody.
Great to have you on.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Talk to y'all again soon. Bye.